Welcome to Ladder Daily Digest. We've got another great lineup today. I think some of you guys, those of you who are watching, will recognize who we've got on the screen here. Jean and I are pleased to welcome René Steelman on from She Became Visible, which is under the Mormon Discussions lineup, I believe.
Yep.
Welcome to the show, René.
Thank you. I'm so pleased to be here. I have met both of you in real life person, and I love that. And this is just such a pleasure for me to be here.
It's nice
we
to
look
have you.
forward to. Oh, yes, thank you. And we look forward to hearing about your podcast. So let's just jump right in. And I think we'll get kind of your story as we go through. But what is it that compelled you to become visible, I guess, and start speaking in this way? And what was it that you wanted to speak to?
Well, thank you. I think basically what happened was, oftentimes women especially will talk about their mental change that kind of happens in their mid 40s, where suddenly they understand that it doesn't matter what you think or what other people think of you. And for some reason, women find their 40s very self-asserting and they're very comfortable with who they are. And I'm just here to tell all of you 40-year-old women that it gets even better when you get in your 60s, because then you really don't care what anybody thinks. But for me, it was a matter of this, and this sounds really stupid, but it was a matter of me letting my hair go gray. And I started to follow other women on Instagram that had let their hair go gray. And many of them talked about how freeing it was, how they felt that they were somehow visible because they had let go of what other people told them they should do. And they wanted to just be themselves. And at this point in their life, a lot of them have grayed really early. But at this point in their older years, they had decided, I'm not going to keep doing this. I'm not going to a hairdresser every 4 weeks. I'm just going to let my hair go gray. And they would tell these stories of strangers coming up to them and saying, you would look 10 years younger if you would dye your hair. Or their daughters saying, Mom, you can't come to the wedding if you don't dye your hair back. Or husbands threatening to divorce them if they don't dye their hair back. And it was startling to me to have something as simple as the color of your hair be so deciding for someone's future.
Mm-hmm.
So that was kind of the impetus. But then as I transitioned or awakened myself out of the Mormon church, it became even more solid that there needed to be a voice of women in my demographics who are now saying, oh my gosh, I had no idea what was happening or what I believed or how I was living my life, and doggone it, I'm done. I want to live my life the way I want to. So that's kind of where the whole She Became Visible thing came from. And so really specifically, I'm addressing my podcast to women in my demographic. So I would say, late 50s up, because those of us that have been around for a while, we've gone through a few of the versions of Mormonism that the church keeps inventing. And so we're aware of some of the things, especially some of the other podcasts, they'll reference things like temple ceremonies or why were you a stay-at-home mom? Why did you have 10 children? Why did you get married at 18? And you tell some of the younger people in the church and they're like, well, they never said that. We never taught that. That was just a cultural thing. And so I'm hoping to bring awareness of, no, this was doctrine that was taught. And there are a lot of women in my demographics that I think they feel stuck. It's kind of like, I'm almost 70 years old. Why on earth would I make a life change at this point in my life? And so that's kind of who I'm reaching, as someone that might be going, I want to stand up. I want to be visible. I want to assert myself more, but I don't know. It's too late. I might as well keep going down the river in my little tube.
Because I think another thing that's specific about Mormonism is that really it does teach women to lose themselves, quite literally, to forget yourself in service to others, which is typically your husband and your children, but also extended out to the ward and your other extended family. It's always to even, yeah, I'm in my 30s. Even for me, still, it was. I mean, I grew up in my teens thinking that the more outspoken I was, or there wasn't any reason for you to stand out, and it was almost a bad thing if you did. That it meant you were kind of a troublemaker of sorts. So a good woman would not be drawing a lot of attention to herself, but would be busy serving.
Yeah,
So I think, yeah, I think that's really great that it's kind of, it's just never too late to find yourself and find your voice.
exactly.
And
We often talk about that when you're talking about education. People will say, well, so and so was 65 before they started painting, or so and so wrote their first novel when she was 68 or whatever. And people applaud that. But then when it comes back to the church, if there was a woman that said, you know what, I can't babysit my grandchildren because I'm going to go back to school and get my degree, or I'm going to write a book, or I really want to take up my painting and I don't want 4-year-olds around while I'm painting. I've already raised 40 of them, And for a woman to feel that they have permission to say that, it was just, oh, like you were saying, Maven, well, you selfish woman, how dare you you don't want to embrace all 25 of your grandchildren every day? That's your life. That's your legacy. How dare you, And so that's kind of what I'm combating is it's to try to erase the selfishness from trying to be a visible, real, whole person and put it back into perspective, even if you wanted to compare it to what is expected of the male members of the church.
I was
Did
going to
you have a
say
question, Jean?
the younger generations of women in the church just need to go to conference talks and look up the keyword lipstick to see how leaders felt about women's appearance.
Yeah. Well, not only that, Jean, but I'm actually preparing my next podcast. I really want to address that because I think sometimes you'll hear this. You'll say, "Well, aren't you glad that the church has made changes?" I'll hear people say, "Well, the temple ceremony. I'm so glad my daughters don't have to go through the old temple ceremony, and I'm glad they've made these changes." And I guess that's true, but I want to do a comparison to what we were taught and how many women lived their entire life with this structure that was given them and were denied the ability to indulge in any interests of their own. And so to deny someone a lifetime of expressing their talents is not something that you just go, oh, well, I'm glad it's better for everybody else. It's almost like I feel, and this might be not a good analogy, but I almost think it's almost like saying to people, well, I know you were a slave, but we got rid of slavery. So aren't you just glad that there isn't slavery anymore? Why are we going to talk about slavery? That's over and done. And we're not doing that anymore. It's like, no, there needs to be awareness of where the mindset was so that it doesn't get repeated. And people can understand where these people came from that made your temple ceremony different. The reason why your temple ceremony is different is because of people that said, I'm not doing this anymore.
And there's generational trauma associated with some things.
Yeah. And even just personal pain at the opportunities lost, because what ends up happening is that we get blamed for living the life that we were taught to live, because we wanted to be good. Like if you were a good girl, you do these good things. This is what a good woman is. This is what a bad woman is. And so it's kind of astonishing to me to see that when we do talk about this now, how often people will say, well, my mom did this or that, or my mom worked outside of the home. She had a great career, and she was Mormon, and everything was fine, Or it's this way. It's really invalidating, and it's making it kind of our fault that we made the decisions that we did based on what we were teaching, based on our adherence and our obedience and our faith and our trust in what we were being told about this. That this is what will make us happy. This is the best use of our time and our talents. And so, yeah, it's really astounding to me that the kind of gaslighting that goes on, where it's like, no, you were never told that. No, that you could have done this, you could have done that. It would have been fine. And
Yeah.
it's like,
Yeah.
it's really unfair, I think.
Yeah, it really is. And I think that's probably one of the biggest things you hear often if you wanted to describe the ex-Mormon and the true believing Mormons, is this idea that because it didn't happen to them, therefore it didn't happen, or you're extreme or you're dramatic. Because as you mentioned, it's like my mom worked full time and there were only 3 kids in our family, and I was born in 1963, so I don't know what you're talking about. And it's like, well, hurrah for your mom who had the ability to stand up and say, I either have to or I want to have a career. And so she went against what was being taught. Hurrah for her. I please give me her name and phone number. I would love to meet her. And so
And
that's
you can guarantee she got pushback for it too.
oh,
This
yeah.
was, yeah, yeah. She was not celebrated as a woman doing it all, for sure. Not in that time. We know that.
Yep, exactly. Yeah.
So
So anyway,
Renee,
that's the precipice for my podcast.
so Renee, who was your first guest, and who's been like maybe a nice get or a favorite since?
You know, it's been a real mixture because I started my podcast out with talking to a lot of women that had children with disabilities. And because if you want to meet some strong women who stand up for themselves, find a woman that has a child that has special needs, because from the minute that baby is given to them, they have to start fighting. They have to fight the doctors, they have to fight the nurses, they have to fight the school system, and they know what it's like. So it kind of goes back to the people that have gone through things. Those are the women that have gone through trials. They're the ones that stand up and say, absolutely not. Where other women will stand up and go, okay, doctor, that's fine, you know. So I started
And that's
interviewing.
your experience as well, right?
Yeah, yeah. So our son was, he was our last child. We have 6 children. He was our youngest, and he had a difficult birth, which resulted in some brain damage. And so you learn that just by experiencing that. But even, you know, every case, there is no, as they say, there is no Olympic gold medal for someone who suffered more than someone else. But I could not help but when I would interview these mothers, just broke my heart how many of them maybe had been deserted by a spouse that couldn't handle having a child with disabilities, and they left. And now you've got a single mother that has to provide roof over the heads, food on the table, plus they have a child with disabilities that needs 24/7 care. How do you do that? How does that work? And so some of those, I have one in particular. I've never met anyone, a good old Terrell. I've never met anyone that has more of a positive attitude. She was a very active young child, very active in athletics. She had an accident with an ATV, and but she was still able to go through, and she was actually working in physical therapy. But while working in physical therapy, she was helping someone, and she fell again, and so re-injured, and she's now in a wheelchair. And they had adopted a little girl that had a very severe form of brittle bone disease, and she's in a wheelchair. And I don't know all the circumstances behind her husband leaving, but she's now a single mother, and they're both in wheelchairs. But when you talk to Terrell, all she talks about is my husband and I used to have a nonprofit organization that helped families get wheelchair accessible vehicles. And she was one of our recipients. And she uses that vehicle to not only transport her and her daughter, but to serve as many other people as she can. And for example,
Wow.
in Oregon, you'll know she lived in Estacada. And last year, I think it was last year, they had some wildfires and they were told to evacuate. Well, how do you evacuate if you're in a wheelchair and you don't have a wheelchair accessible vehicle? So she actually put her daughter in their car and helped other people in wheelchairs evacuate I mean, she's a remarkable person. So,
Wow.
you know, yeah, she was fun. And then I also had another single mom, 3 children with disabilities, going back, getting her master's degree, being a teacher. They're just so inspiring. And these women they're not going to just sit down. You give them a trial and they're like, where's the ketchup that I'm going to put on top of this? Because I'm going to eat this whole thing and spit it back in your face. You know, they're amazing. But then I really kind of turned, as my journey out of the Mormon church started evolving, I started interviewing more women that had left the church, and it's not easy to find women in my demographics that have, especially in my situation where I have a husband that's still a member of the church. And fortunately, he learned that there's more to our relationship than, being temple sealed, eternal covenant making people. And so it hasn't affected our marriage at all, except for he gets tired of me talking sometimes. But other women have had their husbands, they're 50 and their 60s, and their husbands have left them because they left the church, because a bishop told them that you need an eternal companion. And I call bull on that when I hear that, because sometimes I feel like, oh, you just got to get out of jail free pass.
Mhm.
You decided this
Yeah.
was your way to walk away from your family. Now, that's just my opinion, my feminism coming out, but to leave a family over something like that is pretty severe. So, but that's kind of who I'm talking to, and that's who I want my audience. I've had some I love Jean Bodie. I don't know if you all remember her, but she had a fabulous story of serving a mission and just the dedication that when you interview women in my demographics, they've lived and they've gone through a lot, and they have a story, and that's what I'm trying to bring forth.
And it's underrepresented too.
Mhm.
I think it is kind of known that in the post Mormon podcasting world, it is generally people in their 20s and 30s.
Mhm.
It is a lot of, I mean, a lot of parents, but they still have younger kids or teenagers. And yeah, there is, and it is pretty male dominated. There's starting to be more and more female voices all the time, but the demographic is, I think, is a big one. And I think there are definitely unique needs and situations that some of which you're talking about, and others, I mean, even just leaving the church and how that relationship works with your children.
Yeah.
I've talked with people who express a lot of regret for how they raised their kids, and especially, if they're still very strongly in, it's there's a lot wrapped up in deconstructing at a later age, I
Absolutely.
think, than in your 20s or your 30s. Yeah. Do you
Absolutely.
have episodes that talk about that, about relationships with children or,
I need to talk about that more. What I've talked about is the fact that I was very fortunate. Again, I cannot compare my situation to anyone else's situation. So I'm not saying, hey, women, I know you're 68 years old, but doggone it, leave the church. Who cares what
Mhm.
your husband or your kids think? Because I understand that demographic with to be denied access to your grandchildren, or not to be invited to a family get together because you've left the church. That's frightening at our age, to be kicked out because of something like that. So I understand that, and I do sympathize with that. But I personally was fortunate because I have 4 boys and 2 girls, and 3 of the boys had already left the church. My youngest, as I said, was severely disabled, so he was already set in gold. He's going to be in heaven with Jesus, and I don't know where I am, but that's the teaching. And then I have 2 daughters, and one of them is very active, but she's very nuanced, very aware of what's going on. But she's got 4 kids. The church is a very fabulous place to raise kids if you have a mom like her, because she's very accepting and loving and nuanced and teaches her kids the right principles and corrects things that are cuckoo. But my other daughter has gone through a lot of stuff. And so I didn't have that. I don't have grandchildren that I can't see, but I did have a son, even my son that had really pretty much left when he turned 18. He even said to me, Mom, when you told me you left the church, I was mad. I was mad that you raised us and you made us do all these things. And now you're like, oh, never mind, And I thought, that's a valid thing to feel, because that's what I'm doing with the church. I'm saying, oh, really? All this time we had to do this. And now you're like, never mind, So I had kind of done the same thing. But he's he's very smart man, and he understood. But he admitted that. And I said, I'm glad you shared that with me, because I get that. I would be mad. I am mad. That's why I'm mad, so it's relative.
Have you come along any roadblocks, and are you doing things to like manage or change directions or pivot or add to your show?
I am opening up my my idea of only having women on the show. That was my rule. I was going to be a completely women-led, women voices only. And I'm finding that really is limiting, and I need to expand. So I am having more men on the show, but what I'm trying to do is when I listen to them tell their story, I also want to know how the women in their life has affected their lives, their mothers or their wives or their daughters. And I love listening to, like, I had Randy Bell on, and I love his relationship he had with his mother. And so I want to still bring in the feminine voice, even if I have more men on the show. But there's just so many great people in general. I don't want to limit myself. So I've decided to expand. Yeah.
No, I think that's an important point because I think with I mean, just having women on to share their voices, I think really is kind of half of the equation because while it's great to model for women what it's like to start to take more control and ownership of your life and your decision and your choices, this really does have an effect on the men in our lives around us, especially spouses. It can really, really change and switch up the dynamic. So I think it's great to have men on to talk about that and how how for them, what it's like to, I guess, get used to and it switch over from having a woman that you care about be all about you, and then now start to get her own voice. I think, modeling that for men, how to be open to that, how to encourage it even, and be part of that is I think is very, very needed as well. I think that's the other side. So, I think
Right.
that's great.
That's a
Yeah.
really good point, because I also have to remember that everyone's story is based on some kind of paradigm. And my husband was, as I've told in my stories before, when we first got married, he had only been off his mission for 3 weeks. And so he was still kind of missionary mode. He was, talking about companion prayers. And I was like, what are let's don't ever say that word out loud again. Don't ever ask me if we're going to have companion prayers. And so we were married when he was being, what do they call it when you unbrainwash someone? You're going through that clearing process when you're
Deprogramming.
program. I had to deprogram him from his mission. And but we were, right after we were married, he was put in the branch presidency. So he's 22 years old and he's in the branch presidency. So he's going off to meetings, and he's always been like that. So for him to go to church by himself is not a new experience for him. He's kind of used to already just going to church and being in the boys' club. So he's comfortable sitting in sacrament meeting and alone, because he was always on the stand. He never sat with us as a family. So that's not an experience that is a loss for him. And then he goes to priesthood. So his idea of church isn't really that different. But for a man who sat with his family, who interacted with his kids all the time, and is now sitting by himself, whereas like, where's my family? I'm here by myself. That would be a different thing for them to have to change and now incorporate into especially an older man. I can see where that would be like, I can't go to church by myself. I don't know. I've never done that before. I'm 75 years old and you want me to go sit by myself in sacrament? I'm not doing that, but my husband is comfortable doing that. So again, that was an easy transition for me. And I know that there are other people that's not possible, especially at my age. Women who resent their husbands not going to church with them, not helping out with the kids. Why do I have to take 4 kids to church by myself? Why do you get to sit home and watch football while I'm at church by myself? That's a completely different dynamic. And I can see some conflict going on with that kind of thing when I didn't have that. So I'm not saying that what I did was, oh, it was easy for me, so it should be easy for you, because I recognize that every family is different. And like I said, my husband was never there. I always took the kids to church by myself. So for me, that was another visible moment. Was I said to him, I've always taken the kids to church by myself. It's no big deal to me. So if you need to experience what that's like, welcome to my world. And so I had no compassion whatsoever. Yeah.
I think the resentment is a good point to bring up because I think that when you are trying to be a good LDS woman and you're trying to do the things that you're supposed to and be in this box, that is something very commonly I see that does build up over time. And it's not necessarily that I just feel like the system's just a bit broken with the way that how unequal it is with the patriarchy. And as much as they want to try to pretend that husband and wife are equals, they are not true equals in the real sense of the word. And so I do think it's especially in their 40s that women start to kind of really start to feel it doesn't matter how enmeshed you are in the church, how faithful you are in the church, you do start to feel a little bit a sense of loss, and I think of being robbed of a lot of opportunities and yeah, visibility. Honestly, it starts to get to people, I think. And so the resentment that builds or that can build towards a spouse um, can kind of get flipped when a woman does start speaking for herself or turning things down that she doesn't want to do or making time for things that she does want to do, if even if they're not in direct or immediate service of family or church. Then sometimes that's a big change for the spouse when it's like we had this thing going. Of course, it was very beneficial to them the whole time, and it could be like your husband, it could be really easy to just have zero idea of how much of a woman's heart and soul and body has been put into, you know, portraying and being this role, the good Mormon woman. And yeah, it can be quite a shock, I think, for a lot to kind of
Well,
have that flipped on them.
other things too is I have a friend where we used to live whose husband had a we call it when these men retire, and retirement is very, very difficult for a lot of people, because it becomes their identity. Their job, their position is their identity, and they lose that, and they don't know who they are. And so my husband, our son, for some reason, gave him a fun book called How to Retire, 4 or 5 years before he retired. And it kind of gives them a little bit of a get a hobby, learn this, start meeting new friends. It gave him kind of an outline of what to do. But I have known a couple of women, a little bit older than I am, whose husbands were in a very high position of authority in their job, and they retired, and we call them PIPs, which stands for previously important person. And they lose that, and they don't know who they are. So a lot of times, so this particular couple, so the first thing he wanted to do was go on a mission, because now he had, another position of authority. Then he was called as a mission president, so they served as a mission president. Then they served a mission, and then he wanted to go on another mission because he did not know how to just be a husband, a grandfather, a homeowner, mow the yard, get out your whittling knife and make some, whatever. That was not who he was, and he did not know how to retire. And she finally said,
Mm.
I don't want to do this anymore. She was very quiet. She had some really good friends in the ward, and she missed her friends, and she just wanted to stay home and enjoy their golden years. And so that, I think, is really difficult for a lot of women, where they have a life. They think, okay, my children are grown and gone. Even my grandchildren are older now. Maybe I could start just going out to lunch with my friends and really enjoying my life, but their husband cannot stop. And the church does not encourage them to stop. It
Mm.
encourage them to continue and go on another mission, go on another mission. And so these, poor women, even in their 70s and 80s, they don't have the privilege of just standing up and saying, oh, well, I guess I was a
I
helpmate.
get dragged along.
Yeah.
That's interesting. I hadn't thought of that before where they could I mean, because I do know that retirement can be difficult for a lot of people, but it makes sense that in the church that that would be increased even more to where where I guess where women may have trouble standing up and having a voice and speaking up for themselves and yeah, becoming their own person. Men kind of have a similar problem, but it's they don't know how to take a step back and take a back seat and not be this visible person in the
Yeah.
community. So, yeah,
And I
that's an
think
interesting concept.
I think that Mormon men are kind of like conditioned to like be the thinker for the family, be the planner, be the the lead. And so that causes them to think about the retirement as if it's centered around them and not what the decisions could be made, together.
Right.
Well, thanks so much, Renee, for giving us your time. And one thing I like about you is you have really star quality to me, and I think you're visible. And I think that the people that come on your show are going to be more visible, and it can only be better for not only just Mormonism, but the world in general. And I think that we have an open invitation to have you back to report on other things in the future and say more of the story.
Absolutely.
And Maven, do you have anything else?
No, thank you again for coming on, Renee. I think this was great.
I love both of you so much, and I love what you're doing and all the time that you're putting into, just getting the word out and making a community for those that are questioning, those that are in that awakening stage when they're just confused and they're going through cognitive dissonance and they don't even know what that means or how to handle it. And I think people like you are trying to solve that problem and be a little bit of salve for people. So thank you for what you're doing.
Yep. And we, to our listeners, like and subscribe. And if you like what you see, we're going to have like a tip jar, or we're working on doing a Patreon or something like that in the future. And we hope to be able to interview more people and grow fast.
Perfect.
And if you have suggestions, give those to us as well. And if you're a fan of Renee's show and you watch her, also plug her in the comments. What do you like about her show? What has it done for you? Go ahead and share your experience.
That would be great. SheBecameVisible.org. Yep.
That's right.
Thanks
you.
And
everyone for watching and listening.
Thank you.
It's been Ladder Daily Digest, and have a good day.
See you next time.